Not every employee wants to take an annual holiday. Some people might want to actually cash up their annual leave. In a world where we advocate for rest and recreation, for trips to Bali and Fiji, there are some employees that actually want to utilize the money instead of taking those holidays. So what do you do about those employees? If you've ever had a cashing up annual leave request, or if you're an employee that's tossing up about whether you want to cash up your annual leave or not, then this episode is just for you. Hi everyone, welcome back to Law Lenz. My name is Sanam and thank you so much for tuning in today. Welcome back to another Unpack the Holidays Act segment. Woohoo! We are back again with another one. We are looking at cashing up annual leave or cashing up holiday pay. Some employees, they don't want to actually take their holidays, believe it or not. And I know there's going to be a lot of controversy around this. I know whenever I jump onto LinkedIn, I see the masses coming and saying annual holidays and annual leave is there for rest and recreation. It's there to really help the employee. But guess what? We have differences. We have people that are different. And some people do not want to take the entirety of their annual leave. They would rather cash that up. And the Holidays Act actually allows for that. That's right. There is provisions in the legislation that allows for an employee to cash up their annual holiday. Now, you might be wondering, why would somebody want to do this, especially if you've never done it before or you've never come across it before? Look, it's something that I wouldn't see a crazy amount when I was working in advisory. It would generally come up when we were dealing with employees that were short on cash or they needed to send money to their families. So sometimes you're looking at migrant worker cases. Other times you're just somebody that wants a chunk of change before they go on holiday. And we'll get into all of the nitty-gritty today, but just keep in mind that there are some employees that do prefer this option and they may approach you about it. And I'll get into all of the details around who can request it, how it needs to be done. But before we get into it, I just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone's support. If you're not a follower yet, then absolutely give the podcast a follow so that you can get timely updates on all of these employment law insights. And if you are looking at growing with Law Lenz, then definitely jump into the description and click on the link so that you can subscribe to what will be our weekly newsletter so that you get all of these tips, tricks, and insights straight to your inbox. But let's kick off by first looking at the Holidays Act requirements. Now, the Holidays Act clearly details under Section 28A, and I'll link all of that in the description if you want to take a look at it, that a portion of annual leave can be paid out. And that's the wording that they use. Portion of annual leave to be paid out. In all employment contracts, you'll have some sort of wording around leave or annual leave or holiday pay, and it's important to familiarize yourself with those clauses in the contract. Now, when it comes to the Holidays Act requirements, you're generally entitled to annual leave after working for somebody for 12 months, right? So when you're looking at cashing up a portion of your annual leave, then you can do that after each entitlement year and within the entitlement year. For example, let's say that 12 months have ticked over and you are owed 4 weeks of annual leave. After you've hit that 12-month mark, until you hit the next 12-month mark, you have an opportunity to cash up a maximum of 1 week of annual leave because that is in each entitlement year. Now, you can actually make more than one request, believe it or not, as an employee, but it has to be a maximum of 1 week altogether that you ask for. So for example, you might ask for a day here, 2 days there, maybe another day. And I saw a lot of debate online around what 4 weeks is, and I saw it actually on Reddit, funnily enough. Somebody said that I got 10 days cashed out, and then somebody was debating them saying it's meant to be 5. But a thing to keep in mind whenever you're looking at holiday pay is what a week means for the person that you are looking at. So a week can vary. I always used to get the question, what is a week? And it can vary. And it's what a week means to that employee. So for example, if I worked 55 hours a week and I worked 6 days a week and I spread that 55 hours over 6 days, then that is what a week looks like to me. Out of 7 days, I work 6 days and I spread my 55 hours over those 6 days. If you had another scenario, maybe the employee worked 15 hours, maybe they did it over 4 days, then it's 15 hours for them per week over 4 days, and that's what their annual leave would look like. That's the way that you should look at it in terms of what is a week, and it can vary. Obviously, if people have varying hours, then the average is what you need to have a look at, but it can get tricky. So I would say just make sure that you double check your payroll systems and make sure everything is looking okay in that sense, because sometimes with varying hours, it can get a bit complicated. But with that debate that kind of sparked on Reddit that I saw, there were some people that had 10 days, and it's because they might have more annual leave offered to them in their employment agreements, and that's perfectly fine. So if you have more annual leave based on the industry that you're in, so for example, you might have 5 weeks of annual leave in your contract, that's a week extra than the minimum requirement under the law, then that means that you can take 1 week for yourself, and you can even go ahead and take another week as well as being cashed up, because of the fact that you're still meeting the legislative requirement, which is that you still need to keep 3 out of the 4 weeks. You can't just cash up the entire amount, just a maximum of that 1 week, and you're still meeting that, which is great. So that is the way that you can go about it if you've got more leave. But if you just have the 4 weeks, then keep in mind it's a maximum of 1 week of annual holidays in each entitlement year once you tick over to that 12 months. So I always used to get questions around, can I please give them a little bit more? Can I give them a little bit less? It is whatever the employee requests, and you can't give them above a week's maximum. And it has to be that they're entitled to it, and then they've got 12 months after the date that they hit their entitlement, after their anniversary hits, for them to take that 1 week. That's another thing that would come up quite often is, can I take more than 1 week because the employee has been here for maybe 6 years? No, they have to take it within that entitlement year. And if that lapses and then the next entitlement year rolls in, then you need to make sure that you are not giving them more than a week, even though they haven't cashed it up before. Now, the Holidays Act still requires certain responsibilities from the employee and from the employer. So the employee's responsibility to make sure that this is all done in the correct way is to have a request be made in writing. And the employer's responsibility is to consider the request within a reasonable time, and then also to communicate the response in writing. Now, the response can be what they choose, but it has to be in writing. And you'll hear me throughout this episode revisit that point because it is very critical. You may be wondering, if we do process this and we do accept it, when do we need to pay it? How would we go about it? Look, according to the legislation, and it is very clear under Section 28B of the Holidays Act, that it needs to be paid as soon as practicable after the employer has reached agreement with the employee. So if the employee makes a request in writing and the employer accepts it, then as soon as practicable, I would say as soon as possible, you need to process it in the next pay run. Now, I'm no payroll expert. From what I've read, the amount will not be taxed the same way as other earnings. It would be taxed as a lump sum amount, but I would say check with your accountants, check with your payroll providers to make sure that you're doing this and calculating this correctly. The reason why I say be careful with this is because it's the first time I have actually seen something like this in the legislation. You don't come across it too often, but it very clearly says that if an employer gets the payment wrong, and let's say you pay the employee more than what they requested, or the employee hasn't done a request and you've accidentally paid them, well, the section of the Holidays Act says very clearly that the employee can actually keep the money as well as the entitlements, meaning that all of their entitlements basically are intact and they get to keep it again. So if they've cashed up 1 week and that was a payroll error or an employer error, then that 1 week goes back into their leave balance, but they also get to keep the money at the same time. I know. So it is really important that you don't get it wrong, because when you get it wrong, it will be a lot more costly as an employer. So just keep that in mind. And so that's why I say before you process it, when you do get it, just check with your payroll provider, check with your accountants if you've got one that deals with payroll, and just make sure that it's all done correctly, that you're taxing it correctly, and that it's that lump sum amount. There will be a lot of questions, I'm sure, for employers and HR professionals that are listening around what happens if we want to actually decline a cashing up leave request, because you've got to keep in mind as well, a lot of times people don't realize that this money has to sit and float, right? Yes, there are a lot of payroll systems that allocate out a set amount of money that show you as an employer how much money needs to be sitting there as a reserve so that you can pay out annual leave. You need to be able to tap in and have access to this sort of money. So just like with taking annual leave, you may as an employer want to decline a request if it doesn't work operationally for your business. Maybe there is a downturn in business, maybe it's not viable. Whatever it is, I would say that you really need to genuinely consider the request though. Don't disadvantage the employee, because that would be grounds for raising a claim. So it is really important that you're not just saying no for the sake of saying no, but you are able to say no as an employer, and you don't need to provide a reason. But remember, like I said, the response has to be in writing. Even if you're declining it, it has to be in writing. And in some workplaces, I noticed that there were lots of requests coming in. Well, if that is the case, then you may be wondering now, how do I manage multiple requests? What if people start catching on and then they all want to do it? Well, the Holidays Act actually allows for, under Section 28E, it allows for employers to have a policy that prohibits paying out annual leave or cashing up their annual holidays. So you can have that for some parts of the business, or you can have it for the whole business. And again, even if you have a policy in place, if an employee makes a request and you're declining because of a policy, you need to be very clear in that and point them in that direction and tell them that this is the reason why we're declining, is because we've got this policy in place. But your policy has to be ironclad and tight, and make sure that you've really considered everything in that policy. Don't do it in a way where it's ambiguous or it's half drafted. These are the policies that really matter, so that you're not boxed into a corner if you're getting an influx of these requests that you can't accommodate. Now, there are a whole subset of don'ts for an employer, because we can always have do's for an employer, but there always has to be some don'ts, right? And the list of don'ts is quite interesting. It's general common sense things that apply in terms of your good faith requirements as an employer. But as a reminder, just to make sure that there's no ways that you can get around the situation, because I do believe that sometimes employers can get a little bit creative, but that's perfectly fine, because it's about being practical, pragmatic, and commercial, right? And sometimes you need to be a bit creative to be able to do that. So these are the list of don'ts, and the law is very clear on this. And the first one for an employer not to do is pressurize the employee. So employers shouldn't pressure the employee. They actually shouldn't be the ones even approaching the employee about cashing up their annual holidays. This is something that generally the employee will come to the employer for. And so that's why it's much better if an employer is not the one that's deciding that this is what needs to be done. It's the employee coming to the employer, and the employer just confirms whether they are okay with it or not. In terms of the Holidays Act, it also clearly says that an employer shouldn't raise any of these discussions around cashing up holiday pay when you're looking at negotiating salary or wages. So if there's any conversation around that, whether it's a salary increase, promotions, whether you're negotiating a contract, there shouldn't be any of this discussion around cashing up holiday pay. So you want to avoid any of that conversation around there. And then the last thing I would say is that you need to make sure as an employer that you are not including a condition in the agreement around cashing up annual holidays and putting any parameters around that. You can't have a cash up request clause built into the employment agreement. So it can't be in there. It is a requirement under the law, and the employees are able to access that. You can't negate from the legislation, so keep that in mind. And I would say that those are the main parameters as an employer that you need to have a look at. Now, if you're an employee that's listening to this, or maybe a HR professional that's been seeing some requests coming in, make sure that those requests are in writing. They need to be very clear, and understand that in some circumstances, employees might need the money more so than them taking the leave. Well, that's it from me, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope you really enjoyed this episode. Thank you for all of the support. If you have any questions, always feel free to reach out. And it's so lovely to see this community grow. And I hope we can just keep growing together. For anyone out there that is a Frog recruitment client, I will be heading over to Auckland, and I will be presenting an employment law updates seminar. So if you are keen, and if you are looking at getting the latest insights on what changes have already come into place, and what may lie ahead in the future, then definitely register. And I would love to meet you face to face. So I'll leave the link in the description. It is just over a week away, but if you'd like to register, then absolutely. Well, that's it from me, everyone. I hope you have a lovely day, night, evening, morning, whatever it may be. And guess what? I'll catch you in the next one, everyone.